I'm going to talk to you about trading sessions and volume profiles today. So, what are the two types of sessions we have? We have regular trading hours and we have electronic trading hours. So, let's break these down further to actually see where they are and what they can provide for us as traders. Okay, so ETH. ETH is from 4:05 p.m. EST to 9:25 p.m. EST, and it basically stands for electronic trading hours. And this is everything outside of the regular trading hours, or RTH. And this includes overnight session, pre-market, and post-market. So during these sessions, if you pay close attention, typically there's lower volume than the regular trading hours, and it's dominated by reactions to macroeconomic events and overnight news rather than the big institutional players. Okay, and then on the other hand, we have the regular trading hours, which is obviously then from 9:30 to 4 p.m. And this is where the majority of the market makers are transacting. Like I was saying, the institutions, you have the hedge funds, all of the big banks, stuff like that. And volume is the highest and it holds the most relevance over the ETH sessions. So what relevance does this hold for us? Okay, we need to remember that all volume is not equal and that price levels that attract heavy volume carry more value than the heavy volume that could have been accumulated overnight by macroeconomic events or news, etc. So we could say from that there's more informed participants in the RTH session. And if more informed participants are in this session, we could then say the value areas that are built during these RTH sessions are the one that genuinely reflect the institutional consensus. So where the institutions want to push price. If this is the case for the RTH session, we can contrast this with the ETH session by saying that there's less volume and it's easily manipulated. It's reactive rather than decisive. So contrary to what I said about the RTH is informed, this is more reacting off of these macroeconomic news that comes out and other things like that. And it tends to create these false value areas that do not tend to hold when RTH opens. You will tend to see, and I will show this in examples, that this is factual and through testing and data that these levels do not hold as well as RTH levels do. So as we said, the RTH session is from 9:30 until 4. So that would mean that the ETH volume is completely stripped out. And it shows a much cleaner picture to where institutions are accepting value. So we could say from that standpoint that the point of control, the value area high and the value area low are much more reliable areas of support and resistance. And it really does show that true session value area. So if you haven't heard these terms before, which is completely fine, let's go into a little breakdown of what these words actually mean and what relevance they hold. So this is POC, stands for point of control, and it can be summarized as an area of volume where the most amount of transactions were made within a session. And they're also referred to as HVNs or high volume nodes. And then the value area low is where supply is higher than the demand and sellers do not want to partake at the auction because they believe that these prices are too low for them to sell. Value area high is where demand is higher than the supply and buyers do not want to partake in the auction because they believe that the market is in too much of a premium for them. So now what does that look like on an actual chart? Here's an example. So as we can see here, we have the value area high, which is this orange line here. And then, as we said before, price exceeded this price and it built value before returning. This is significant. I will talk about this as well. So then we have the point of control, which I have marked out as this black line across the charts. If you can see as well with this shape. By this point here, we can also justify that this was the most amount of transactions that were taking place throughout the profile. In this case, it would be the RTH session. And as you can see here, that's what I've stated. And then we have the other side, which is the value area low, this orange line here. And this is where price begins to auction lower. And as you can tell in this scenario, we've come down and we've rejected these areas, meaning that these sellers do not want to interact at these low prices. Buyers take control and push price higher. Okay, so now we know what these terms mean and you're familiar with this. Let's move on to what a full session profile tells us. So this includes all the overnight volume. And it can actually distort the POC and the value area if there's a lot of movement overnight. This basically means that the POC is not as accurate. It's also important to consider that these full session profiles are actually more useful when it comes to macro events, and more particularly the major ones. So when you see CPI, FOMC, earnings, Fed chair changes, stuff like this, you will notice that there is significantly more volume overnight. And these times when this is prevalent makes these session profiles much more valuable to you rather than when there's not these events. And this basically means that these ETH created gaps that are in the profile, so for example in LVN, it means that these levels are at a higher probability of being revisited once the RTH session opens. I will show examples of this later on so you get a gauge of these things being revisited and so on and so forth. So now let's have a look at concepts specific to RTH and ETH. Now, as a note, let's remember that overnight range is the range in which price travels in the ETH before RTH open. That's what the overnight range is. And we could see this by looking at an FRVP, which is standing for Fixed Range Volume Profile. It's a tool on TradingView and on many other platforms that you can use in order to gauge where the volume is being transacted over past data. So this is historical data. So as I've said, we can see where these overnight participants are building their positions. We can also see areas of low volume and areas of acceptance heading into the RTH open. As well as this, we could also see some potential targets when RTH opens that price can return to and then make an informed decision on where it wants to go. So speaking of examples, let's show an example of this. So as we can see, let's look for some possible targets and areas of interest within the RTH session, as well as where these overnight participants were able to build their positions. So, market participants built their positions near the bottom of the volume profile. How do we know this? This is not a directly accurate drawing, but let's just say it's like this. Okay. You can very clearly see. I do it like this. Yes, okay, it might look like a bit of a distorted B shape, but the concept is the same. Lots of value is built around here. How do we know that it was accepted? Because there was a clear range here. There's no specific breakout specifically that told us exactly where price wanted to move. So that was them building their positions overnight, leading into RTH. So considering that we're already within an area of acceptance near the point of control, this is the closest target, and there was an LVN resting above the POC, and we immediately gravitated to this. So as you can see here, just before market open, come up, we go down. Just before market open, we trade down. And then as soon as RTH opens, we trend up. We trend past the POC into this area of low volume, which I've highlighted here. And then the market shifts slower. So this is an example of these institutional players re-entering these areas that were of interest during ETH open. So moving on to example B, what can we see? We can say that these market makers were building their positions during the last portion of the ETH session, with that being near the highs shown by the POC and the HVNs. Simply just POC is here. As you can see, positions are being built, general price is being accepted until we get that eventual breakout over here. So how do we know that they're building this volume higher? Well, these P-shaped profiles can infer to us the price is probable to trade higher off of RTH open, and that is what happens. So if we draw this out, I can show you quickly. Rough P, yes, that is a P. So to recap, a P session volume profile infers heavy buying power going into RTH, and a B volume profile infers that sellers are stepping in and they want to move price lower opening into RTH session. Okay, so now let's move on to another topic, that being opening price versus prior RTH value area. So how can we gauge this? Well, there's three scenarios that typically will play out. That being, you have to open within the prior RTH value area. This basically tells us the market's in balance. We can expect these heavy rejections from the extremes, that being from the value area high and the value area low, until eventually a breakout does occur. We then have the open above prior RTH value area high. That infers that the market is bullish, and that if RTH participants want to accept these prices above, and we can see this volume building, we would expect a move higher, and if not, we can expect them to return to the previous value area, which can be the point of control or just another area of high volume. So then with this, we can then move on to the opening below the RTH value area low. So that would infer that we are bearish, and we can confirm this further by watching this RTH volume build below the value area. And if it does not, then it would want to return to prior value or areas of consolidation and such like. And we can compare this and add confluences to stack to put the probabilities even more in our favor. So that is a lot to take in, and it's a lot to be said without actually knowing how do we actually apply what I'm saying. So before the RTH open, you'd want to plot a fixed range volume profile over the prior RTH session. That's the first stage. And with this, just take in mind what the value area high, the value area low, and the point of control are. Then you plot your overnight ETH range. And as well as the last one, you take in mind the value area high, the low, and the point of control of this range. And then to go from there, we want to assess the open, where the price is actually opening in relevance to this prior RTH value, whether that be inside, as I was saying before, meaning balance, below, meaning the market wants to move lower, or above, which means the market wants to push higher. And like I said, this can enable us to be able to see the directional bias for the first hour. And from then, typically, it will follow in fashion. So where do we move from here? And then we can watch for the ETH level tests. So we could look at the highs and the lows of the ETH session, or areas of supply and demand, as well as areas of low volume, as shown in the example before. And if these moves are not backed by volume, that means they're harder to break. And if not, they're very much easier to break. So it's a lot to take in. But to actually finish off, let's talk about how the current RTH profile builds. So as the session actually develops, you'd want to watch the live volume profile in real time. My personal opinion is Bookmap, simply because on Bookmap and other softwares like Deep Charts, you can actually see the live session volume profile. The problem with TradingView is its historical data, that being transactions that have already taken place. So moving on to the POC, is the POC actually migrating in one direction, or is it staying central? So if it's migrating in one direction, that infers that it is a trending move and that price will continue higher. On the other hand, if the POC is staying central, we can say that the price is balancing, and that's when you will see the typical rejections to the extremes. Once again, the extremes being the value area low and the value area high. So there's another core rule we need to talk about when it comes to these things. So that being, you want to anchor the primary value area analysis to the RTH volume. Why is this our primary area of analysis? Simply because this holds more power than the ETH, which brings us on to the next point, and that being that the ETH should just be used for context, telling us what happened while these institutions were not on the markets, and it signals where price may want to go. So do not take this as gospel compared to RTH. And as a foreground in general, this is all probabilities. There are days where this does not happen. And even though you open above the prior RTH value area high, price will still move lower. Regarding this anyway, the RTH profile is generally the ground truth of where the market genuinely values the volume profile of these value area highs and value area lows. So to quickly remind you, the ETH open is from 405. I do it one candle after, so the 405 to 925 EST. There being the RTH open is then the 935 to 355, or the RTH open from the first candle after and the last before the close. Bringing us onto the general consensus, RTH session basically means we're rediscovering price at areas of low volume in the ETH session by these big institutional players. And if the RTH session opens above the prior high, consensus is bullish, as I've said. And if the open is prior to the RTH lows, then we are bearish. And if we open within the prior RTH session, then we should be ranging between these extremes, that being the value area high and the value area low, as stated here. Okay, so here we have the RTH session and the prior RTH session volume profiles. Let's just pay attention to what we're seeing here. Let's just mark it out. So we have a P profile, What does that signify? Buyers are in control. Let's take a look at the value area high to keep this in mind, as well as the point of control of the previous session. The value area low in this scenario is not as important. However, we can say that there's no significant LVNs needing rediscovery during the session simply because it's a P profile. So a lot of this volume is stacked towards the highs. So for us to come back down and rediscover, it's significantly lower probability coming back down here. So the open in relation to the RTH session is above. So as I've been saying, what does that mean? The consensus is bullish. And it is. That's correct. And the price did play to this upside during this session. We can also see that the POC migrates higher throughout the whole session. You can actually test this yourself. If you go into TradingView and you put your FRVP indicator in and you just drag it throughout the session, you'll notice that if we're in a bullish trend, the POC will continually move up throughout the price action. This is one good example. Let's go on to another one. So now I've actually plotted the ETH session as well as the prior RTH and the current RTH. So what can we see? So the RTH session did in fact close again above the value area high of the previous session, as we can see here, quite a way away from the previous session in terms of price. So value area low was here, closed above, we opened above. Okay, so what can we look at? Well, ETH levels to possibly target. We have the value area high, as well as some high volume nodes here. And we can also see that we come straight back in to this area of high volume. We wick down past the value area high and continue higher. So there's always some sort of target that we reach on the ETH before pushing higher. And as well as this, like I said before, final thing to look at is the POC. And what did it do? Well, throughout the session, it migrated higher. And that hints at that continuation that I've been telling you about. Now everything good comes in threes. So why not show you one more example? Okay, cool. What do we see? Once again, just drilling this in your head so you know. Prior RTH session plotted here. Then we have our ETH session. And then we have our current RTH session. So RTH session actually opened within the previous RTH. So price opened here. We're within this previous range. So we can actually expect the rejection from both extremes. And as you can see, we tap the value area high. And then we reverse to the value area low here. And then we come back up. And then it's not showed on the specific example, but price does come up again, rejects, and then continue lower again. So hopefully these examples do give you this insight on some physical data of how you can use these volume profiles to your advantage. Because me personally, I have been testing it quite a lot recently, and I could never actually gauge a proper way in how to anchor this. There's lots of different things online. People say that you can anchor it just from the areas of consolidation. But as a general consensus, I feel like this works very well. And my hit rates through testing have been in the 80th percentile throughout this, when we see these prior RTH open to a higher open, meaning price goes up. These ideas, these concepts, they've been working. And hopefully they do continue to work. You know, I'm hoping for that because this is a big element to my personal bias. And hopefully this also provides some value for you in some way. So if you did enjoy this content, please consider liking and subscribing. And we're going to keep pumping out content, daily updates on my trade recaps, as well as educational content like this will just keep coming. To end on that, I'm just going to shamelessly plug my Instagram, nq.hnr. Please follow me.